September 1944, France liberated, Germany within reach, but the Allied advance that had stormed across Europe in a matter of weeks now ground to a halt, not from German resistance, but from something more mundane: empty fuel tanks and bare supply depots. The armies had outrun their logistics, stranded hundreds of miles from their supply ports. Every gallon of gasoline, every artillery shell had to travel from distant Normandy beaches along roads choked with traffic and cratered by months of fighting. In this moment of paralysis, Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery saw opportunity. While General Eisenhower advocated spreading Allied strength across a broad front, pushing toward Germany on multiple axes, Montgomery proposed something audacious. One powerful, full-blooded thrust across the Rhine and into the heart of Germany, backed by the whole of the resources of the Allied armies. A single concentrated spear aimed at the Ruhr, Germany's industrial heartland. End the war by Christmas. The strategic debate between these two visions created enormous pressure. Montgomery's approach demanded everything: all supplies, all support, all attention focused on one dramatic gamble. Eisenhower's broad front meant steady, methodical progress without catastrophic risk, but steady meant slow, and slow meant winter, and winter meant another year of war. Against his own strategic instincts, Eisenhower approved Montgomery's plan. Perhaps it was the tantalizing promise of a swift end. Perhaps it was political necessity, giving Britain's senior commander his chance at glory. Whatever the reason, the decision transformed a moment of logistical vulnerability into the foundation for the most ambitious airborne operation ever conceived. The plan would be called Market Garden. It would require perfect execution across 62 miles of enemy territory. There would be no room for error, no margin for the unexpected. Everything would have to go exactly right. The plan's architecture revealed its fatal flaw. It eliminated chaos from warfare. 9 bridges stretched across the Netherlands in a perfect line from the Belgian border to Arnhem. Each one had to fall on schedule. Each one had to remain intact. If German defenders demolished the bridge at Eindhoven, XXX Corps would halt before reaching the next objective. If paratroopers failed to hold Nijmegen, the entire northern sector would collapse into isolation. The mathematics were unforgiving. 9 bridges, 9 chances for catastrophic failure, 0 margin for the friction of combat. XXX Corps faced an equally impossible task. 800 tanks and 50,000 soldiers would advance 62 miles along a single road barely wide enough for 2 vehicles. The Dutch called it Highway 69. British planners called it the Axis of Advance. What they didn't call it was what it actually was: a causeway elevated above flooded polder land, flanked by ditches and soft ground that would swallow any vehicle straying from the pavement. The Germans wouldn't need to defeat XXX Corps in battle. They simply needed to destroy one bridge, disable one tank at a crucial choke point, and the entire column would accordion into gridlock. The timetable demanded superhuman precision. 41,000 paratroopers would execute the largest airborne operation in history across 3 separate drops, seizing their objectives within hours. XXX Corps would then cover 62 miles in 48 hours, faster than the German blitzkrieg through France, while fighting the entire way. No traffic jams, no mechanical failures, no unexpected resistance. The plan required eliminating every variable that makes war unpredictable. It required perfection. War had never delivered perfection before. And yet the plan proceeded despite a catastrophic blind spot. While planners obsessed over timetables and bridge capacities, Allied intelligence had failed to detect approximately 100,000 German soldiers positioned throughout the operational area. Worse still, elements of 2 SS Panzer divisions, the 9th and 10th, were refitting near Arnhem itself, their tanks parked in the same woods where British paratroopers would soon descend with nothing heavier than anti-tank rifles. The assumption of weak German resistance wasn't merely optimistic, it was fatally wrong from the start. Aerial reconnaissance photographs had captured the unmistakable signatures of armor near Arnhem. Dutch resistance fighters sent urgent warnings through their networks, but these signals never translated into action. Some reports were dismissed as exaggerated. Others arrived too late in the planning cycle to alter the massive machinery already in motion. The operation had acquired its own momentum, a gravitational pull that made stopping seem more dangerous than proceeding. So the British 1st Airborne Division prepared to drop into what their briefing officers described as lightly defended territory held by second-rate garrison troops, old men and boys barely capable of resistance. The intelligence summaries painted a picture of an enemy on the verge of collapse, disorganized units retreating in disorder, nothing that determined paratroopers couldn't handle until XXX Corps arrived. The men boarding their transport aircraft on the morning of September 17th carried this comforting fiction with them into the sky. They didn't know that SS Panzer crews were already positioned along their drop zones, that hardened veterans who had survived the Eastern Front were waiting below, that the element of surprise they counted on had been surrendered before the first parachute opened. The dramatic irony was complete. The soldiers flew north, believing they faced scattered defenders. They were dropping into a concentration of German armor. The British 1st Airborne Division landed 8 miles from Arnhem Bridge, not on top of their objective, but in open countryside that forced them to march toward the city carrying only what they jumped with. Light anti-tank weapons designed to stop armored cars, not Panthers. Ammunition for 48 hours, not 9 days. Radios that would fail almost immediately in the wooded Dutch terrain. Lieutenant Colonel John Frost's 2nd Battalion fought their way to the northern end of Arnhem Bridge by nightfall on September 17th. Roughly 750 men secured the bridgehead and waited for the thunder of XXX Corps tanks that should arrive within 2 days. Instead, they heard a different sound. The grinding treads of German armor moving into position around them. The other battalions never made it. German forces cut them off in the streets and forests surrounding Arnhem, fragmenting the division before it could concentrate. The radios that might have coordinated their movements produced only static. The resupply drops that might have sustained them fell into German hands when colored smoke marking friendly positions drifted over enemy territory. Frost's men held the bridge for 4 days and nights. They fought from houses overlooking the span, moving from room to room as German fire collapsed each position. They rationed ammunition, counted every shot, and watched the southern horizon for relief that never came. By September 21st, with half his force dead or wounded and the buildings around them burning, Frost himself was hit by mortar fragments. The mathematics were simple and brutal. 62 miles separated them from XXX Corps. The plan had allowed 48 hours. It was now 96 hours since the drop, and the tanks were still 35 miles away, stalled at Nijmegen. Every hour the plan had lost compounded into catastrophe measured in British lives. The tanks that could have saved Frost's men sat immobilized not by German firepower, but by geography. XXX Corps stretched along a single elevated road, Hell's Highway, barely 2 lanes wide and raised above the sodden Dutch polder on either side. 800 tanks, 50,000 soldiers, and thousands of supply vehicles moved in a column that extended for miles. Each vehicle dependent on every vehicle ahead of it. The entire force compressed into a corridor so narrow that a single destroyed tank could halt the entire advance. The Germans understood this vulnerability immediately. While Allied planners had envisioned a rapid thrust through scattered resistance, German Kampfgruppen struck the flanks relentlessly. At Weigel, 25 miles south of Nijmegen, German forces cut the road on September 22nd. For 36 critical hours, the single artery connecting XXX Corps to its supplies was severed. No fuel moved forward, no ammunition, no reinforcements. The massive armored column simply stopped, stranded in hostile territory while the clock at Arnhem ran out. The claustrophobic nightmare intensified with each attack. Tanks couldn't maneuver off the raised road without sinking into the waterlogged fields. Supply trucks burned where they stood. Engineers worked frantically to clear wreckage under fire while the entire operation bled time it didn't have. Every hour the road remained, cut cascaded through the timeline like falling dominoes. The 48-hour schedule had become a sick joke. The Germans didn't need to defeat XXX Corps in battle. They simply needed to cut the road, and the entire thrust collapsed under its own weight. At Arnhem, Frost's paratroopers counted their remaining ammunition and watched the empty horizon. The tanks were still 35 miles away, trapped on a single road that had transformed Montgomery's bold thrust into a static, vulnerable target. At the Arnhem Bridge, Lieutenant Colonel John Frost's paratroopers had been fighting for 3 days in positions they were supposed to hold for 48 hours. The northern ramp belonged to them, a pocket of rubble and burning buildings barely 200 yards across. Everything else belonged to the SS Panzer divisions that surrounded them with armor and artillery. They fought with what remained. Ammunition had dwindled to handfuls of rounds per man. Medical supplies were exhausted. The wounded lay in cellars without morphine, their screams punctuating the constant crash of German shells. Paratroopers pulled bullets from dead comrades to keep firing. They had no anti-tank weapons capable of stopping the Tigers and Panthers that prowled just beyond their perimeter. So they waited until the tanks came close enough to hit the vision slits with small arms fire, forcing them back temporarily. The September 19th deadline had passed. XXX Corps had not arrived, would not arrive. The paratroopers could see smoke on the southern horizon where the tanks sat trapped 35 miles away, but they might as well have been on another continent. German loudspeakers called for surrender. The British answered with gunfire they couldn't spare. Each hour brought fewer defenders, less ammunition, tighter perimeters. The plan had dropped them here with light weapons and promises of relief within 2 days. Now they understood what that meant. They were the expendable buffer in a timeline that allowed no margin for reality. By September 21st, Frost's position had contracted to a handful of buildings. The Germans brought up self-propelled guns and fired point-blank into British positions. When the SS finally overran the northern ramp, they found men who had fought until their ammunition was gone, then kept fighting with German weapons scavenged from the dead. The bridge belonged to the enemy. It always had. By September 25th, when the survivors of the 1st Airborne finally withdrew across the lower Rhine under cover of darkness, the accounting was brutal. Of the 10,000 men who had dropped at Arnhem, fewer than 2,000 made it back. The bridge they were promised relief to hold, the bridge that was supposed to be the gateway into Germany, remained in German hands. XXX Corps never reached it. The operation failed to achieve its primary objective. There would be no crossing of the Rhine in September 1944, no thrust into the heart of Germany, no end to the war by Christmas. The Allies would spend a bitter winter fighting through the same ground. Market Garden was supposed to bypass, paying again for territory the plan had promised to seize in 48 hours. What the postmortems revealed was not a cascade of bad luck, but an architecture of inevitability. The intelligence failure that missed 100,000 German soldiers eliminated the operation's foundational assumption. The single road that funneled 800 tanks through a 62-mile corridor created a choke point that any competent enemy would exploit, and they did, severing it for 36 hours at Wegel. The supply cut made the 48-hour timeline mathematically impossible, yet the plan contained no contingency for delays because contingencies would have required admitting the timeline was fantasy. The British 1st Airborne bore the ultimate cost of this zero-margin design. They were dropped at the operation's furthest point with light weapons, given a 2-day window, and told relief was certain. When the certainty collapsed under contact with reality, they fought and died in place because the plan had never considered what happens when perfection fails. The largest airborne operation in history became warfare's most expensive lesson. Bold strategy without operational resilience doesn't fail heroically. It fails inevitably.